Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to debate on clauses 127 to 191 in Part 3. The question is a Part 3 stand part. Dr David Clark.
Part 3 of the Act includes the changes that relate to the United States FATCA legislation, the foreign account tax compliance measures, and these changes that we are agreeing here today facilitate the collection of data from New Zealand citizens at their own expense to pass on a portion of that information to the United States government via the IRD. So what we're being asked to do here today in this Parliament is to enable banks to collect information on every single person who is in New Zealand at their expense in order to weed out what information is deemed to be interesting enough to pass on to the IRD, who will then pass that on to the IRS in the United States. And we had many impassioned people come and speak to us in Select Committee about the potential privacy breaches that this meant, that people would be caught up in this who otherwise were law-abiding citizens but would now face potential prosecution from the United States. People who may have been born in the United States, for example, but never lived there as a conscious being, so they left in early childhood and then find themselves in New Zealand, and they are now deemed to be a New Zealand citizen for whom information might be collected for the United States government. It will also affect perhaps people who have worked in the US briefly, who have then, for one reason or another, not completed a little bit of tax paperwork down through the years and may have incurred astronomical penalties as a result. Those kinds of people who otherwise are law-abiding citizens, who are now New Zealand citizens, may face prosecution from the United States as a result of the agreement that we are putting forward today. That collects information from every New Zealand citizen, every single New Zealand citizen, in order to pass on that information to the United States. Now, of course, the banks need to comply, and we on this side of the House accept that the 30% wholesale surcharge that the US is threatening would be quite an unreasonable imposition on our banks if they were non-compliant. We feel that the government could have moved much earlier to push for a more reciprocal agreement, an agreement that sought to make sure that all information on New Zealand citizens avoiding tax in the US was passed back to the New Zealand government, and that the US's tax database, obviously much broader than ours, was something that they would be willing to share fully with us for our advantage as a country. But what we've found throughout this process is that the government has taken a very casual attitude. When I questioned the Minister in Select Committee about the legislation we were passing as to why the principles of reciprocity couldn't be built into the legislation, if that's what the government believed ought to happen, why it couldn't be built into the legislation, there was some evasive conversation. When we asked about whether the Minister had actually seen the intergovernmental agreement that was due to be implemented then in 1 month's time, the Minister said that he had every confidence it was a good agreement, but that he had not seen it. Right. And goodness me, we wonder why the Minister is there collecting his ministerial salary if it isn't to look out for New Zealand's interests, to look at these international agreements. And he looks to the sky. He's not interested. He says, that's not my job. I'm here to collect the salary, to lean back in my chair and to not make speeches in Parliament. That seems to be the Minister's attitude as he watches this bit of legislation go through. But looking out for the interests of New Zealand, looking out for New Zealand companies who are facing an unlevel playing field where we know that there's a great deal of tax avoidance overseas, and New Zealand companies tend to be good corporate citizens that pay their taxes here. We know that there's an unlevel playing field out there. The Minister doesn't seem to want to tackle tax avoidance on any scale, be it by the large corporates or be it by ordinary citizens, other than at the bidding of the US government. That seems to be the only time he leaps to his feet and clicks his heels and says, yes, I am available for service. But when it comes to speaking in the House, to laying out a vision for the tax system, he's strangely quiet. When it comes to pointing out that the reciprocity might be put into the agreement, or even looking at the the legislation that we're passing, the material in the legislation. He's too busy for that, only to say yes to the US, only to pass the legislation as promptly as he can. So, Mr Chair.
Dr David Clark.
So we on this side of the House think that this process could have been handled a lot better. We think that the officials, when they first came before the committee, had not had impressed upon them by the government the importance of negotiating this, of making sure that tax agreements were beneficial to New Zealand, that really forceful negotiations were carried out. This we know because the tax officials that we've dealt with in the committee have been all, I think without exception, very, very good, Mr Chair, but they're dictated to by the government of the day's priorities. And when the government says this is a low priority, there'll be a standard agreement, we'll just sign up to it, that message is passed on to the officials and they seem reluctant to engage with it, and as well they might, because they are in a department that's under pressure, a department with falling compliance levels, voluntary compliance for business taxes falling, in a department where phone calls go unanswered, in a department that has billions of dollars of uncollected tax, 7 billion at last count. This is a department that is struggling because of the outdated technology which it uses to administer the tax system. But it needs leadership from the minister. It needs a minister who is actually committed to ensuring that everybody pays their fair share, that the tax system isn't tilted towards the large end of town, toward multinationals having a tax advantage that New Zealand companies can't have also. And we know that, the statistics tell us that this is the picture. In the last 4 years, there have been fewer small businesses created in New Zealand than have been destroyed. And this is a worrying trend. We see small businesses in New Zealand not flourishing as they should. We hear tell of a rock star economy, of a big upturn, but it seems that the big corporates and the wealthiest individuals are securing a larger share, and indeed those who will be working with the US, the banks are being looked after here. We need secure financial institutions, but we don't need all of that at the expense of ordinary New Zealanders not getting a similar deal, of ordinary New Zealanders and ordinary New Zealand firms having the same level playing field, so that there's a fair competition out there and that people can work hard and get ahead. We on this side of the House want to see a fair tax system. We want to see reciprocity in the kinds of agreements that we are passing the enabling legislation for today. We would really like to have had the agreement in the legislation right the way through. If it had been negotiated in a timely fashion, we might have debated it more fully in the Parliament. It's only just now that we've had access to it, and it's very, very late in the piece, and shows a tardy government that is really not up with the play, that is really quite happy to pass into law bits of legislation and conditions placed on New Zealanders, collecting information at New Zealanders' expense without even seeing the paperwork. And it's not a pretty picture. It's a government, I guess, that's lost touch with what matters to ordinary New Zealanders. Ordinary New Zealanders, people like me and others represented in this House, want to see a government that is in touch, that is looking out for their interests, that is looking to make sure that the playing field is level, that things are fair, and that everyone can have the opportunity to get ahead, not just a privileged few. So, Mr Chair, when we come to pass this piece of legislation, it is important that we reflect upon the way it could have been better. As I've stated in the other parts, it was rushed legislation. It was put through with a very short consultation deadline, and then we've had the Minister's amendments coming through. I'm pretty certain there will be more, and we will see more, because this is not a piece of legislation that has had the full scrutiny of Parliament that it might have had if there had been a more diligent minister who was willing to roll up his sleeves and do his job in the manner which is expected.
Mr Chair.
The Honourable Todd McLean.
Mr Chair, thank you very much. I want to thank the last speaker, Mr Clark, for his fulsome support of this part of the bill. And I know